Noah, Daniel, Job. Those three names are well known in the Bible. I don't think most people would necessarily put those three names together in the Bible, but like in one sentence for that matter, but these names are known in and of themselves. But they are known because God wanted them known. Their stories are in the Bible because God wanted their stories in the Bible. And they do share something in common: calamity. Of course, Noah is associated with the flood that destroyed all of mankind except for those that were on the ark. Job and his wife were all that survived of his servants, of his livestock, of his children, his family. They were all destroyed by Satan, or at the fingers of Satan at least. And during the time of Daniel, the southern kingdom, Judah, represented, as we saw this week with our passage talking about Jerusalem, meaning Israel and Judah more specifically, during that time, the southern kingdom fell to Babylon, and captives were taken from the land of Judah, and eventually the temple was destroyed. But these individuals are named because they survived each of those calamities. But in Ezekiel 14, these individuals are linked together because of that truth. In Ezekiel 14, God talks about a set of punishments that will come upon Jerusalem, and that only those with the righteousness of a Noah, of a Job, of a Daniel would be spared. Specifically, God said that not even their sons or daughters would be spared. Verse 14, 16, 18, and 20 of Ezekiel 14 again. First, God mentioned the option as it relates to His judgment. How would His judgment be carried out upon the people? He mentioned the option of preventing supplies from being delivered to Jerusalem in verse 13, meaning there would be no more bread coming into Jerusalem. Then He mentioned the option of allowing animals to ravage the land in verse 15. A third option was to bring sword against the land, i.e. put them into a place of battle, verse 17. And finally, God talked of sending pestilence in verse 19 to the land with a specific reference to His wrath being poured out on the land. Now, let's face it, any of those four options would be devastating. And you might recall a similar instance where God laid out options. He did so with King David in 2 Samuel chapter 24, which is also recorded in 1 Chronicles chapter 21. And in this, David had completed a census to number the people of Israel, to know how many people he had at his disposal for an army. This is late in Daniel's life, in David's life, late in David's life. And because of that, he was encouraged not to do it, but Satan tempted him to do it. And God said, I'm going to give you three different options for your punishment. You choose which one. Well, God didn't give Ezekiel an option of punishment. He didn't give the people an option of the punishment in this time period, some 500 years later, but because God had already made the decision. But what God did not do is He did not send one of these options as punishment. He gave all four of these as punishment. He was not just going to prevent supplies or send animals or send pestilence or send an army. God was going to do all four things against a people who had turned so far from Him. In the closing verses of this chapter, verses 22 and 23, God said that some of the sons and daughters who were in Jerusalem at that time would be spared. But again, He's compared Noah and Job and Daniel previously. Each of those three were spared because of their righteousness. But the individuals in verses 22 and 23 would not be spared for their righteousness. Indeed, they would be spared as proof to Ezekiel that what happened because it needed to happen. The people who remained would testify about God doing the right thing, but they were going to do so because of their unfaithfulness, and by God sparing them, Ezekiel would see how unfaithful the people really were. And it would be proven that God is just. The book of Ezekiel is about a man who is tasked to deliver a message to the people of God who do not care, who actually rebel against God. But in Ezekiel 14, we see that God will spare the righteous from His wrath. In the time of Noah, it was from a flood. In the time of Job, it was from death at the hands of Satan. In the time of Daniel, it was destruction. It was saving him from the destruction to come in Jerusalem. For those living at some unspecified time in the future, maybe minutes or days from now, maybe centuries and eons from now, the righteous will escape from the wrath of God that is revealed, the type of wrath that is revealed in the bowl judgments as we find in Revelation chapter 15 and 16. But for those who love God, for those who follow Jesus, for those who are truly righteous, there is a greater escape than what Noah or Job or Daniel experienced. The escape that those who follow Jesus can have is an escape from eternal damnation. As bad as any other outcome of God's wrath might be, regardless of what it might bring about on this earth, being eternally separated from God would be the worst form of wrath. So let us be like Noah, and let us be like Job, and like Daniel, not only that we might escape a calamity, but that we might live for Jesus now, so that we might enjoy Him both now, but ultimately forever.